Everything I believed to be true about my job, myself, and the business I had dedicated the last 7 years of my life to fell apart on a sunny Tuesday. I'm Avery Davis, and I worked my way up at Pulse Creative, a fast-paced marketing firm renowned for its innovative digital campaigns. For over 10 years, I had everything I needed in my position as senior strategy manager: a reliable salary, the respect of my peers, and the sense of accomplishment that comes with seeing a project through to completion. That's what I thought. Anyway, I wasn't only a cog in the wheel. When things went wrong, people turned to me. I oversaw a team, took care of the larger projects, and was the person who others turned to when there was a tight deadline. However, I was unprepared for what transpired that morning. I was working on a proposal at my desk for Griffin Enterprises, one of our most significant clients. My phone rang as I was deep in concentration on my laptop, making last-minute revisions. I noticed Rachel, the HR manager, when I looked at the screen. She called unexpectedly. So I hurriedly answered, praying it wasn't a simple call. "Avery, would you mind stopping by my office for a bit? A bit more formal than usual." Rachel's voice was tight. "Yes." I tried to sound steady as I answered, "I'll be right up," but I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling, trying to ignore the knot in my gut. I packed up my belongings and headed to the Human Resources Department. Rachel was seated at her desk as I entered the office, but there was no friendly grin or light conversation. She waved me to take a seat. "Hi, Avery." She nodded to the man seated next to her and said, "This is Ben." I had worked with him for years as the head of operations, but he appeared different today. He appeared to already know what was about to happen since his face was inscrutable. The room was suddenly too small and too silent when I sat down. Rachel said, "Avery," in a tone that was considerably colder than normal. Unfortunately, after evaluating your performance over the past few months, we have chosen to take a different course." I blinked as I tried to make out what was being said. "Have you changed your course?" What was she discussing? "What do you mean?" "Wait," with a trembling voice, I asked. "What's happening?" Without looking into my eyes, Ben cleared his throat before continuing. "Avery, we're letting you go." With instant effect, the room spun around in my mind. Let me go. I was unable to comprehend what he was saying. "Fired? You're letting me go?" With my heart racing in my chest, I inquired. I had spent years working at Pulse Creative. I had given my everything to this business. It was illogical. With a solemn gaze, Rachel nodded. "The company's requirements have not been met by your recent performance reviews." The turning moment was the Griffin campaign. Deadlines have consistently been missed, and your most recent strategy suggestions have fallen short. Someone who can keep up with the speed is what we need. I was having trouble breathing. The campaign of Griffin, we had put a lot of effort into that, and the client had given us good feedback. I had done everything I could to ensure that everything was in order. My throat constricted. However, "I'm not sure I understand. I worked late. I've taken on more work. I've always persevered." "What made you simply let me go?" Rachel glanced briefly at Ben before turning back to face me. "Avery, it's just not working out. It isn't intimate. However, the leadership committee has decided on this. We'll make arrangements for you to pack up your belongings and give you a severance compensation." I had the impression that the world was closing in on me. Package for severance? Was that it? Was I to leave with my head held high, knowing that the life I had fought so hard to achieve had been ripped away in an instant? This doesn't make sense. "Rachel." "Ben," I replied, scarcely raising my voice above a whisper, "I fulfilled all of your requests. Why now? Why me?" However, I never received a response. I was denied the opportunity to argue, to beg, or to request another opportunity. I was simply instructed to leave after receiving the documentation. Without uttering another word, I got up and left the room, numb. Every face I passed in the tight hallways was a blur. Their pity was not what I wanted. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. All I wanted was to get away without giving it any thought. I pressed the button when I got to the elevator. The weight of everything was crushing me, and my hands were trembling. As the doors shut, I was out of breath. The days that followed were hazy. I was having trouble concentrating since everything was blurry. The words and the way they spoke, as if it were simply another business decision, replayed that meeting over and over in my mind. "We're letting you go?" I couldn't help but hear those words. After leaving the office, I sat in my car for the first several hours, clutching the steering wheel and trying to regain my breath. I had no idea what to do or even where to go. Now what? I was stuck, but the world seemed to keep turning. At least not yet. I wasn't prepared to tell anyone what had happened. I sat in my living room that evening, obliviously watching the television. There was not a single text or call on my phone, which was sitting on the table. There was nothing in my email. I should have been making connections and reaching out, but I wasn't prepared. I felt as like I was an outsider in my own life and that all of my hard-earned accomplishments were suddenly meaningless. I eventually dozed off, but my dreams were jumbled with visions of the office, my coworkers, and the never-ending deadlines I had to meet. I had the same feeling of emptiness when I woke up, along with a dull headache. The next morning, I forced myself to wake up. I couldn't remain in bed indefinitely. I needed to fill the emptiness with something to do. I began looking through employment postings, but nothing seemed quite right. I became increasingly aware that I was looking for more than just a new job as I continued to hunt. I was looking for an excuse to keep going. The paycheck was no longer the main concern. It wasn't even about looking for a different employer. It was about rediscovering who I was, the ambitious, enthusiastic, and motivated woman who thought she could make a difference was who I had been when I started working at Pulse Creative. I still had that person inside of me. All I had to do was grab her. I decided this couldn't be the end for me. I was going to fight back for my integrity, which I had lost in the process, as well as for my work. I tried to put things together over the course of the following several days. In an attempt to make sense of what had transpired, I began going through all of my emails and meeting notes. However, nothing tangible was present. Buried beneath layers of corporate language, everything seemed ambiguous. Something substantial was what I needed. Evidence. Evidence that something more significant was happening and that this was not merely an act. I then gave Rick a call. He was the only person I knew who could help me see things from a different angle. He served as my mentor when I initially started working at Pulse. And even though we didn't stay in touch much when I got promoted, I knew I could rely on him. When he answered, I tried to speak steadily and said, Rick, I need help. Something larger is happening, I believe. I wasn't fired over the Griffin account alone. Something else is involved. I must know what took place. I must know why. Rick made no hesitation. Avery, I've got you. I'll investigate. I'll look around. Give me a few days, please. I felt a little more at ease after hearing him say it, as like he understood precisely what I was going through. Perhaps I wasn't the only one like this. The days that followed were a haze of silent contemplation and phone conversations. A part of me still worried what would happen next, even if I didn't want to acknowledge it. Could it have been my fault? What if the criticism I had gotten was accurate? What would happen if I had overlooked something that nobody else had noticed? Although I didn't allow it to take hold, the dread of being incorrect and of being rejected did creep in. Then, as I was starting to give up, Rick gave me another call. I discovered something. He declared, "You're correct, Avery. It goes beyond simply firing you. Some of the transactions don't line up. According to the financials I looked into, Clarissa and the head of Finance exchanged some unsettling emails. She was pushing out people besides you. She has been getting rid of everybody who would disagree with her." A rush of relief washed over me. I wasn't insane. It has nothing to do with me. This was about power, about someone controlling everything by virtue of their position. I had evidence now. I knew it, I murmured, my voice barely audible above a whisper. I was aware that something was off. "Now, what should we do?" Rick hesitated, then answered, "Avery, you must make this public. You possess the proof. However, you must exercise caution. Going in with guns blazing is not an option." I met with Eleanor, a lawyer I had gotten in touch with months before in case I ever needed assistance, that afternoon. She didn't flinch when I told her everything. "The first person who genuinely believed in my fight was her," Eleanor remarked. "I can assist you with this. We have the ability to sue them and remove them. However, it will be a struggle. We will require additional witnesses and proof. You're battling for more than simply your career. You are standing up for everyone that Clarissa's actions have silenced." She spoke like a spark. I was no longer merely advocating for myself. I was defending all those who had been duped, all those who had been cast aside when they were no longer needed. I filed the case the following day. It was more than just eliminating Clarissa, making sure that no one else had to go through the same ordeal was the goal. I no longer felt scared. I was adamant. I had no idea what would come next. Despite the uncertainty of the road ahead, I was certain that I would not allow them to prevail. The days following the lawsuit's filing seemed to drag on interminably. I kept going over everything in my head, including what went wrong, why Clarissa singled me out, and how I got here, even though I knew I couldn't stop now. There were days when the anxiety tormented me. I needed to continue moving forward. Eleanor and I met daily to go over the specifics of our case and find ways to strengthen our evidence. We discovered more the deeper we dug. Before we began removing layers of emails, financial reports, and internal documents, I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole had gone. It became increasingly evident as we learned more that Clarissa was more than just a lousy employer. She was involved in a much wider network of corporate wrongdoing, and more folks began to come forward as we discovered more. There were others who had also been duped. Rick had contacted a number of former workers who had collaborated closely with Clarissa. They all supported my suspicions. One by one, Clarissa had been evicting people in a methodical manner. She had maintained control by using deceit, manipulation, and terror to silence anyone who dared to challenge her authority. I wasn't alone. Henry was the one. Brian was the one. Ava was the one. My phone buzzed one day as Eleanor and I were going over additional documents in a tiny cafe. The email came from an unidentified sender. When I clicked on it, an internal memo from Clarissa herself appeared as a document. Rachel Davis, don't participate. Get a replacement ready. Inform HR right away. At the first chance, have her removed. Put employee loyalty ahead of experience. I was having trouble breathing. Before I ever committed a mistake, they were preparing to replace me. I showed it right away to Eleanor. As she read it, she narrowed her eyes. She declared, "This is gold. We need the smoking gun." Clarissa was fully aware of her actions. After a week, everything was different. This fresh piece of evidence, the Clarissa memo, tipped the scales. Even though we had already drafted the case, there was more to it than an unjust termination. It involved intentional sabotage, a plan to eliminate any potential danger. The legal team had already begun reaching out to witnesses, former workers who had been intimidated by similar methods. They all agreed to speak up one by one. It became increasingly obvious as more people came forward. Clarissa had based her empire on deceit rather than hard work. I experienced an odd sense of tranquility the morning we submitted the completed case. I had anticipated feeling nervous and afraid of the repercussions. Instead, I felt filled with a peaceful assurance. At last, I was retaliating. And until the truth was out, I wasn't going to stop. The weeks that followed were a blur. The company was plunged into chaos after the story was picked up by the media. The board members who had previously backed Clarissa began to turn away. They were no longer able to deny the reality. The disparity in finances was, too, significant to conceal. It was impossible to ignore the lies. There was a catch, though. Clarissa was determined to fight until the end. In her own statement, she said the lawsuit was only a personal assault by a disgruntled employee who was attempting to damage her name. She made an effort to portray me as a loser who was only upset over losing her job. Even if the attacks were expected, they were nonetheless painful. She attempted to change the subject by focusing on me and my errors. Now, however, the truth was out. People were paying attention. People were listening. At that point, the whistleblowers began to come out. Former coworkers who had been terrified of losing their employment began to come forward and tell the truth about Clarissa's actions. How she had concealed illicit financial transactions, falsified paperwork, and manipulated contracts. She could feel the walls closing in on her. One evening, I recall sitting in my living room and looking through the headlines. Once more, my phone buzzed. Rick texted me about it. "Avery, we have them. Tomorrow is the board meeting. They intend to get rid of her." I felt as though the burden had been lifted for the first time since it all began. This was taking place. Clarissa was becoming unruly. I had trouble sleeping that night. Sitting in the dark, I reflected on all of my experiences, including my restless nights and moments of uncertainty. Now, however, everything was becoming clear. And while I was sitting there, I came to a significant realization. I had prevailed because I wouldn't keep quiet, not because I was correct. Everything broke the following morning. In addition to publicly apologizing for her behavior, the firm formally dismissed Clarissa. It was reported by the media, but now there was no going back. She had permanently left the company. The truth had prevailed, but the harm had been done. Later that day, Eleanor gave me a call. Avery, you succeeded. You defeated them. I sat there trying to take it all in while I stared at the phone. It was done. It didn't feel like the end. For some reason, something else seemed to be starting. I said, steadily. I didn't just take them down. We did. Every one of us. This was more than just me. I got an offer a few weeks later. I was contacted by the CEO of Greenlight Ventures, a brand new startup. They were assembling a group of people that appreciated honesty, openness, and creativity. Additionally, they wanted me to become their head of strategy. It was more than a job. It was an opportunity to make a new beginning and create something significant from the ground up. I came to a significant realization that evening as I stood in front of my apartment window, watching the sunset. Not only had I regained my career, my life was mine again. Although the battle had been difficult, it had been worthwhile. I knew that I had the strength to confront whatever came next as I looked to the future, although it felt like a gradual return to normalcy in the weeks following Clarissa's evacuation. Nothing was truly the same. It was more than just the court win. It has nothing to do with the media coverage or the litigation. It had to do with something more profound, something I was unable to adequately describe. I had changed from who I was at the beginning of this. I was merely trying to stay afloat at the time. I was attempting to fit into a world where I didn't feel like I belonged and make sure everything functioned. But now that I had spoken up for what was right and prevailed, I was at last comfortable in my own flesh. However, that did not mean that the work was done. I had a meeting with Greenlight Ventures' leadership team a few days following the settlement. Nestled in a peaceful area of the city sat a modest office. There, the folks were different. They truly cared about creating something significant and were honest and candid. Being in an environment where I could contribute without doubting myself and feel like I could breathe was a relief. Michael, the CEO, was friendly and hospitable. He didn't waste time making small talk. His eyes were fixed on me as he sat across from me. Avery, your reputation comes before you, he continued. We have been keeping a careful eye on your journey. There is strength in what you did, fighting back, standing your ground. People who can take chances, question the current quo, and act morally even when it's difficult are what we need. I couldn't resist grinning. What I needed to hear was right there. I felt the weight of my words as I said, I'm not here to play it safe anymore. I want to contribute to the creation of something significant, something that is based on honesty. Michael gave a nod. That's our main goal here. We are looking for someone that isn't scared to challenge conventions and ask questions, someone who wants to have a significant effect and who believes in the work we're doing. After that, the conversation flowed naturally. I knew I was supposed to be here by the time I left their office. Greenlight Ventures offered more than simply a job. It was an opportunity to contribute to the creation of something that would stay, despite how bright the future appeared to be. I was unable to ignore the unanswered questions that still plagued me. Even though Clarissa was fired, the harm she had inflicted had not been undone. Those who had participated in her actions were still out there. There were many who had ignored her errors and concealed them. They were still in charge and making decisions. At that moment, I came to the crucial realization that this battle was about more than one individual. The system was at issue. It was about any business that prioritized loyalty above ethics and riches over people. I couldn't just leave if I truly intended to change anything. I have to keep going and keep bringing the truth to light. I therefore made a choice. Greenlight Ventures is not the only company I would join. I would use my new role to ensure that my core beliefs, honesty, openness, and justice, formed the cornerstone of all I did going forward. As I adapted to my new role, the weeks flew by. Although the work was difficult, it was energizing rather than exhausting. I felt as though I was finally accomplishing the work I was supposed to do with each project I worked on. I understood, however, that the altercation was not limited to the office outside. A more significant event was taking place. I realized I had to contribute to the evolving discussion about business ethics, honesty, and openness. I began sharing the lessons I had learned the hard way, writing about my experiences. And giving speeches at conferences, I sat down at my desk one evening after a long day at work and gazed at the words I had just composed for a new piece. It dealt with corporate responsibility and how businesses could improve. Before they came out of me, I had no idea how much I needed to write down these ideas. It was now about the future rather than just my own experience. I slumped back in my chair, fatigued but satisfied, and pushed send on the piece. I had survived hell and emerged on the other side. And I had a voice now, a voice that might be useful to others, a voice that was no longer going to be quiet. The piece was published a few days later. In a matter of hours, it became viral. Colleagues, strangers, and even former Crescent Media employees who had heard my story and wanted to share theirs reached out from all over. They had experienced the same oppressive control and pressure. It was no longer merely a written document. There was a movement, an opportunity for others to come up, to speak up, to make demands. At that moment, I understood that what I had begun was about more than simply myself. It concerned all those who had ever experienced silence. I had made a complete circle. I wasn't merely starting over in my job. For everybody who had ever been disregarded or discarded by a system that didn't care about them, I was reconstructing the story. I was going to make sure my voice was heard because I had taken a stand. I didn't really see the significance of everything that had transpired until months after the piece went viral. This was the culmination of the litigation, the argument, the restless nights, and the never-ending interrogation. I came to a significant realization as a result of the tremendous response, the encouraging words, and the innumerable others who reached out to share their personal tales. It was no longer just about me in this fight. In a society that seemed to be more concerned with the bottom line than the people behind the numbers, I had spent years worrying about fitting in and proving myself for the first time in a long time. However, I felt as though I was right where I should be, in my life as well as in my work. On a Thursday afternoon, I got the call that would completely alter my life once more. The well-known voice of my CEO from Greenlight Ventures said, "Avery, it's Michael. We've been considering how to advance the business, and we would like you to be involved in a new project that we're starting." With a rush of interest and enthusiasm, I straightened my posture. What type of initiative? We are launching a new initiative that emphasizes ethical leadership, employee empowerment, and openness. Someone who recognizes the value of integrity and the courage required to stand up for it is needed to lead it. We want you to be in charge. I was momentarily at a loss for words. Did this actually occur? I had always hoped to have an influence and change a company's culture, but I never thought it would happen so quickly or in such a surprising way. Are you certain of this? Still processing. I asked, "This is such a big responsibility." Michael laughed. "Avery, you've spent your entire life getting ready for this. Nobody is more qualified for it than you, in my opinion." His comments weighed heavily on me, yet instead of being overwhelmed, I had pride. Through every hardship, every disappointment, and every part of the trip I had battled for, I had earned this moment. I answered without hesitation, "I'm in. Let's get it done." For me, that day was the start of something completely different. I was now an architect of change rather than merely an employee. We started a program that involved more than just modifications to internal policies. It was about fostering an environment where workers felt free to express themselves and where ethics were the cornerstone of all we did, not merely trendy terms. We conducted training sessions, meetings, and workshops during the ensuing months. Although it wasn't simple, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. It takes time to change business culture, but I knew I was headed in the right direction with every stride I took ahead and every discussion that began to change. I paused in front of the building one evening on my way out of the workplace to glance up at the sign over the entrance. Greenlight Enterprises, it was more than a job, it was a mission. And I wasn't working alone on this. Everyone in the organization, even those who had supported me along the way, was now a part of something greater. I reflected on where I had been only a few months prior, confused, disoriented, and vying for a place at the table. And now I found myself at the head of a movement that would transform the way people conducted business. My phone buzzed one more as I stood there, overwhelmed by everything. Ava, the intern who had been with me since the beginning of this war, had sent me the message. Just as I had once assisted her in discovering her own voice, she had witnessed my ascent from the ashes. The text said, "Hey Avery, I just wanted to say thank you. I can't express how much it motivated me to witness you fight and defend what's right. My life was altered by you, and I'm prepared to help others in the same way." I grinned as a sense of peaceful fulfillment washed over me. It all came down to this: not just standing up for myself, but also assisting others in doing the same, assisting them in discovering their voice. "You've always had it in you, Ava," I swiftly texted back. "You have my admiration." A few weeks later, I presided over one of our first employee empowerment seminars in front of a packed house of Greenlight Ventures staff members. There were people of diverse ages, experiences, and backgrounds in the room, and I came to a realization as I gazed out at them. This was only the start. When I was first fired, I was terrified of what was ahead, fearful of being forgotten, of being ignored. However, I now understand that avoiding fear was not the goal of my journey. It was about embracing the issue, confronting it head on, and leveraging it to create something bigger. There was still uncertainty in the road ahead. There would always be additional difficulties and barriers, but now I had a purpose, something more powerful than terror. One thing was certain as I stood there, prepared to speak: I wasn't finished yet. There are many times in life when we feel like everything is falling apart and we question whether we will ever be able to take back control. However, there is a silent force that is only waiting to be found during those uncertain times. It's the ability to climb because we find it inside ourselves, not because the outside world permits it. It's never too late to change your course. Start something new and stand up for what's right. You are considerably more capable than you realize. Even though the path may be difficult and the obstacles may appear insurmountable, we're still writing your narrative. Therefore, don't be scared to advocate for yourself, to believe in your own value, and to take decisive action in the direction of a future that is consistent with your principles. Fighting for a peaceful, fulfilling existence is something you can do at any age. In the end, it's the process of conquering that defines us, not the fall. And every setback is a chance to get stronger.